2014 was a disappointing year for many tomato growers on Prince Edward Island. A new aggressive strain of late blight was reported across the province. Home gardeners and community gardens were hit hard, and many were forced to throw out infected plants. Well, now Agriculture Canada has launched a campaign to encourage islanders to grow blight-resistant tomatoes this summer. And Island Morning's Nancy Russell has, been digging into the story.
Here we have tomato tissues that Anne has sprayed with the spores of the blight pathogen.
Here in his lab in Charlottetown, Rick Peters is keeping a close eye on the new strain of late blight. Peters is with the Crops and Livestock Research Centre of Agriculture Agri-Food Canada. The new strain is called US 23 and it arrived in Canada 3 years ago. What makes US 23 different from other strains of blight is the way it attacks tomatoes.
You've probably heard last couple of years home gardeners saying, I just can't grow tomatoes anymore because of blight. And that's because this new strain is really aggressive on tomatoes and will take them out very quickly. So here's an infected tuber. And
Rick Peters says US 23 moves rapidly through infected gardens and can spread to potatoes, eggplant, peppers, and even petunias.
And once you start seeing symptoms on a plant, well, the ones next to it might be diseased already, but you don't really see the symptoms yet. They'll show up 4 to 6 days later. So one of the recommendations for home gardeners is, of course, if you see symptoms of disease on a plant, bag it so that no spores are spread around, and then cut it off at the base and just seal it in the bag and throw it in the garbage to decompose on its own. We don't want them put in compost piles because the spores can still be generated on those tissues until the plant's completely dead. If you look closely, some of the darkening that's starting to take place.
US 23 hit hard last summer on P.E.I. Home gardeners brought in 50 to 60 samples of infected plants to provincial labs, samples that eventually made their way to Rick Peters. Peters says tomato seedlings are also a potential source of late blight.
Tomato transplants that sometimes travel quite long distances, not only in Canada, but from the U.S. into Canada, and then are sold at various garden centers around the region, have been found to be infected with blight. And this US 23 actually came in that way on infected garden transplants. We have some cultures growing here.
Rick Peters has already done a few information sessions with the Charlottetown Garden Club and later this month in Summerside. There are also other industry meetings planned. Everywhere he goes, Rick Peters is handing out free seed packages of blight-resistant tomatoes.
We've tested all of these in our lab here against US 23, and they've shown excellent resistance against this new strain. So we're trying to tell people that it's a really good idea to grow some of these new varieties that are blight-resistant. A, to get a crop in your garden. That's your first priority, I guess, as a home gardener. But B, so that you're not a source of spores that might damage the potato industry, because, of course, that's a billion-dollar industry here in P.E.I.
Here at the Vesey's store in York, Tara Daggett is stocking up on seeds for her garden. She has already made the switch to blight-resistant tomatoes.
So that we don't have to spray and we can enjoy more tomatoes rather than dead ones. We've lost different crops to blight before. And since we don't really like to spray our garden, we just eat what we get, and what we lose, we lose. So it's better to go with blight-resistant if available.
And have you tried these ones before?
I have grown the plums before, but this is the first time I've tried the Mountain Merits, so we'll see how they go.
So there's 5 different varieties. There's Mountain Merit, which is...
Angus Mellish is the seed manager at Vesey's. He says the company now offers 5 varieties of blight-resistant tomatoes, out of about 40 varieties in total. And they will have 2 or 3 more in test trials this summer. Mellish admits the blight-resistant varieties are slightly more expensive.
They will probably be among the more expensive varieties that we have, but they're not way out of line with our other good hybrid varieties. But to me, the little bit of extra cost, I feel there's a lot of value in that. I mean, if you're going to go to all the work to go out and plant and look after these tomatoes all summer, and they fall apart in September and you get very few tomatoes, really have you saved that much versus if you spent a little bit more for the plant or for the seeds up front and you get a really nice big harvest into the fall.
Angus Mellish says he has also heard from nursery owners across the island who are planning to plant blight-resistant seeds to sell as transplants this summer.
There are certainly some nurseries that are taken an interest in it and are looking to promote the blight-resistant varieties because they certainly have an interest in making sure that their customers are successful as well.
Plenty of flowers in the garden, but also primarily vegetables are what people are growing.
Adam McLean looks at the photos on Facebook from last year's Legacy Garden in Charlottetown. He managed the garden last year and saw firsthand the damage caused by late blight.
Oh, well, by the end of it, everybody. That's the nature of blight. It's a community disease, so if it's in one section of the garden, it's likely to spread. It was certainly a challenging couple of days when people find out their tomato plants have to be removed. So there's a lot of disappointment, a lot of frustration, and a lot of green tomato chutneys and salsas.
Adam McLean says the issue of late blight was discussed at a meeting of the Legacy Gardeners in January, and the group has agreed on a new strategy for tomatoes in the garden in 2015.
Well, there's a lot of community gardens that outright ban growing tomatoes. We do not want to take that step. So what we're doing is basically a new set of rules around growing tomatoes in the Legacy Garden. Effectively, the only varieties of tomatoes that would be permitted will be the blight-resistant varieties suggested by Rick Peters and others. And then we'll also have a workshop in April about how to grow tomatoes to reduce the possibility of being affected by blight.
Here you'll see some tomato seeds.
Back in his lab at Agriculture Canada, Rick Peters and his colleagues will be looking out for signs of blight in home and community gardens in 2015. They have set up a tracking study across the country to keep an eye on US 23.
You always have to keep on top of it because it, as you can see, changes. And so it's possible that a new strain will come along. That's why this tracking study, get that information and then alert people to what enemy they're dealing with in a given year. Down below you'll see some infected tubers.
For Island Morning, I'm Nancy Russell in Charlottetown.
The white fuzz and the spores coming off of those, they're not very appealing.